The African Bible, Part 1. In the beginning there were Africans. They were the ancestors of all mankind. Their story is one of travesty and despair. The race would never live up to the potential God intended. Outside forces and those within prevented an otherwise remarkable race from thriving in this world. It all started in the motherland, a land full of natural and human resources. Each region had its own unique traditions, skills, and spiritual beliefs. Although not technologically advanced as its northern counterpart, God entrusted these tribes with his riches. And for ages, the people and its resources were preserved by the treacherous landscape that no stranger dare enter. As a result, the Africans lived in a blissful ignorance to the ominous powers that be. But nature could not contend for long. The evilest of men eventually made their way through Africa with a force so strong that the seeds of protection would have to bend. There were explorers in those days. The wealthy would pay these explorers to find territory and laborers to build new empires. Their ventures brought them straight to the sub-Saharan jungles. The explorers knew they had the weapons to overpower the natives. They ambushed them, forced them onto ships, and sailed to the new lands called Americas, where they were sold into slavery. Once they arrived on the new land, the Africans were confused at what they saw. Indeed, they were in a strange land, yet when they looked up, there was a familiar sight. It seemed the sun, the stars, and the moon followed them to this place. Looking up at the celestial skies every day was a reminder of God's presence. The heavens gave them a sense of hope. They dreamt of better days as they worked through unimaginable pain and abuse. Generations grew up and died as slaves. As time passed, the idea of freedom felt farther and farther away. Some began to accept their new roles as slaves. They thought that this was what God intended for their past misdeeds. But as others saw their generations multiply, they knew they had to fight for their children's sake. The rebellious ones planned their great escape. Some were successful. The vast majority did not risk their families for freedom, though. Freedom without power was useless, so they thought. Part 2. As soon as the slave had all but given up, God intervened just enough to see what his people would do with a little more worldly freedom. The oppressors, who believed they were acting on their own morality, permitted more blacks to work, to own property, start businesses, and travel freely. Some blacks began to flourish under this new America. Having a taste of success made it possible to believe that America was a land of opportunity. Race is no longer a factor that determines one's future. It's all about willpower. Societal changes came with a price. That which is no longer needed must be exterminated. African Americans were no longer a commodity in America. Mexicans and other nationalities begged for the opportunity to be laborers once held by the former. The eyes of the oppressors. In the eyes of the oppressors, the immigrants were more obedient and tolerable than the African Americans. They became citizens seemingly overnight. Their road to prosperity has never been fully disclosed. What was clear is as their status improved, they took on the mentality of the majority, despising the black race. The Africans were unaware of what was happening right under their noses. They were distracted by their own dreams of grandeur. They too began to emulate their oppressors. They wanted their homes, their education, their women, and their power. They fought fiercely for integration and acceptance, and it came with a hefty price. They lost their souls to society. Thus began the slavery of the mind, a more potent weapon for destruction. The oppressors will manifest and have their way, one way or another. There were several attempts to relieve the white man's burden: abortions, integration, immigration, interracial marriage, drugs, mass incarceration, media, music, welfare programs, propaganda through education, water poisoning, food poisoning, healthcare neglect, diseases, pandemics, distractions, 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 and those things that can never be told. Despite all the attempts to depopulate the Black race, none was more catastrophic than social media. Now Blacks had a way to escape and create their own reality. They entered one created especially for them. It was called OWE, Omega World Entity. What they couldn't achieve in this world, they most certainly could virtually. Imagine a world where all your dreams come true. The longer you stay, the happier you'll be. Once this app was installed, only the strongest of minds could remove it. It was designed that way. Thus, Blacks could no longer distinguish reality from fantasy. Those captivating images of sex, drugs, violence, wealth, love, and power enticed them to stay. Their productivity dwindled along with their population. The commanders, formerly known as oppressors, assured them that this was for the greater good. Productivity leads to stress, and procreation served no purpose since they were now immortal. More and more signed up and sealed their fate. They believed in this system and passed their beliefs on to their children and their children's children. Several Blacks begged their brethren to stop. They were quickly silenced, though, by the commanders. Alas, the last generation of Blacks across the globe followed the dreams of their parents. They too were captured by Omega World for eternity. There is reason to believe that a small group of survivors who turned off the switch is out there, but their whereabouts are unknown. It is said that the commanders are still in search of them. They are seeking not to kill the survivors, but to learn from them. As fate would have it, the eventual collapse of technology meant the destruction of the world. The commanders never learned to live in harmony with nature. Now they have nowhere to turn but to those whom God entrusted his riches. Amen.